lastly, let's look at your origins designs. I noticed a few things overall, but generally wanted to mention to watch our sizing for some of them, placements with logos, et cetera, et cetera. File naming, we want to make sure that we are using the correct file naming conventions for all of the assignments, but not only the origins one, but we want to make sure that we are following our naming conventions. I know it seems nitpicky for a class, but these are kinds of things that you'll be doing in the field professionally. Most companies have naming conventions, and if you don't follow them, then files get lost, et cetera, and then we get in trouble. The other thing is there's a few people overall that need to keep in mind the target audience, right? We're trying to reach that sort of male audience, again, which is sort of even still today, traditionally a tough audience to reach. So we want to keep that in mind, right? All right, let's get started with Elizabeth. So this is one, again, like I said, design-wise, it's not too bad. I like the look of it. I like the setup of it. It's got a decent image. It's got a good flow. The images at the bottom are organized fairly well. But again, we want to make sure that we're targeting the male demo. Here, obviously, it looks as it skews more female. And then I think a little bit of editing with your tagline or your headline. Your skin is the most you can have on your body. It's not a bad idea. That's just a lot of yous kind of in a row. So you have your, you, your. I think some word economy there will help out a lot. Um, Potentially, depending on what we change this image to, you might be able to free up a little bit of space at the bottom here, maybe make that slightly bigger. Um, and then I'm just kind of selecting these, moving them over a bit, maybe make these a little bit smaller, and then that might free up space. Obviously, after we edit this a bit, that might free up some space here. Again, we're going to have to potentially either change the image. We'll definitely change the image, but change along with that, maybe change um, your tagline there. We can also make the Origins logo a bit bigger. If you wanted to have it tucked in the corner, tuck it in the corner. We might need to reorganize this a little bit. Having the sort of headline go across the top-ish there will sort of free up space. Not that you want a ton of space between these. I do like the overlap that you have going, but maybe, not cover up some of the products so much. Specifically this one. There we go. This one specifically. Again, we're selling these products, so we don't want to cover them up so much. And I know you guys don't know the sizing of these, having not seen them, obviously. So it's hard to tell, but like this bottle is much bigger. This actually is a small bottle. You guys, again, having not seen them, you wouldn't know that. But yeah, I might reorganize this a little bit. Give yourself, some room in between these, just so you're not covering these up so much. Like especially this orange one was kind of tucked way back. Let the consumers see the products a little bit more. And you might even be able to organize it with a little bit. You had this sort of nice flow to it where, um, you know, depending if you had your tagline at the top, give or take, and then, you had this organized so it kind of flows. Not that you want it like super on the nose, but if you had it sort of flow kind of left to right, if that makes sense visually. You can still kind of have this. this kind of layout, and depending on the order you wanted, we kind of have this, maybe not so much like in height order, but you kind of get the general idea of what I'm doing here. You wouldn't want it so necessarily like obvious like stairs, but you could have this, and if you want to sort of rearrange them a little bit, you can sort of have this, a little bit of a flow to it where, give it some movement, right? Arrange your products in a way visually that you can kind of create some kind of movement, bringing eyes from left to right. And then lastly, I don't mind this font. It's a bit hard to read though, even though these are going to print pretty large. You don't want to go super plain, but you could potentially do, like again, I would do some editing there. And then again, depending on how you rearrange that for your audience. But if you wanted to have like you be, a different font, um, and then have like your skin is the most you different font, and then you can have on your body a more sort of simplified font, so that's a little bit easier to read. I think overall the start of the layout is pretty decent. Again, I think arranging some of your products, definitely arranging, changing the headline there, and then different image to go along with the target audience. I think this could work well. Okay, let's go to, and then some of these are JPEGs, which we'll be exporting at the end, but all right, let's go to Jeremy's here. So I think overall this is a great layout. I'm assuming, just looking, knowing the file, that everything is within that safe space. I think it comes to like here-ish, give or take. But I like the image, very strong image. I like your headline. Again, a little bit of editing maybe. And I think I like the sort of idea of the product. I think they kind of like float a bit, if that makes sense. And I think you're kind of covering up a little bit of the image there. Um, I mean, obviously you are, but I was going to say unnecessarily, but that's not necessarily what I meant to say. So I might rearrange. I like the idea. Oops, I went too far. I might take, we want to make sure that I couldn't tell if you're squishing that logo or not. It might be stretched a little bit vertically. But yeah, I might go with a more solid color with your Origins logo. I like the sort of texture you put in there, but just to make sure that it's more sort of easily recognizable. If you wanted to go with the same or similar color, but just kind of get rid of the texture there. And then I think for your headline, oh, I keep scrolling. I think for your headline, I might see how you like it, but sometimes like simplifying is best. I might do like get ready for nighttime. I don't know if that's too cheesy or not, but see how you feel about that. Because I think sometimes like get ready for the nighttime, or I might say get ready for the night. So either get rid of the time or get rid of the, depending on how you like the flow. But sometimes like simplifying it so it's not, you know, um, like a headline rolls more, it's not so clunky. Um, and then I would definitely make it smaller. Give this some room to breathe. It's kind of like right almost against this guy's head. We're going to theoretically be printing these 2436, so you have plenty of size or plenty of room. So you can probably drop this down, if you scaled it, give or take 20% less, maybe give or take, you'll have to see. But I would go, scale it by 80% and see, and then, that gives it some room, around the head again, because then these will print rather large. And then lastly, with the products, I might switch it up and have maybe your Origins logo, not small, but small-ish, tucked into this corner, and then maybe throw a couple of the products in this bottom corner, just so we're not covering this image. Like if we're covering the shield, it's not as bad because we can obviously see what it is, and it's not that it's not important, but it's less important. But I think it might be kind of cool to show the sword, um, over showing the shield. So if you wanted to grab like a couple products, and throw them over here. And again, sort of tucking the Origins logo up here to just sort of clean it up a little bit. So I think, yeah, editing the headline, freeing up some space a little bit by making this a little bit smaller, and then picking a couple products, putting them down in the bottom corner, and then logo upper corner, and see how that looks. But um, I think that would work pretty well to sort of, again, free up some space and give it a little bit more flow. But overall, I think it's a really great start. All right, then we'll go to Alexis's that I kept scrolling to by accident. Um, I really like this concept. I think the idea of it, um, you know, we need to think of these things like sort of in practice. If you're walking down the hall, of a mall, technically, you sort of see this down the hall, and I feel like it's, already it's pretty visually intriguing, right? Sort of stark black and white, the sort of negative space right in the middle, and then you see this sort of positive space of the climbers there. I think it makes for an interesting visual, um, to sort of catch an eye. I think for this one might just be a little bit of, um, obviously editing, but um, editing your tagline a little bit. I like the feel of burn. You have your Origins logo, works well in the upper right. I almost said left. In the upper left there. We want to make sure that we're not distorting it. I feel like that looks a little bit squished vertically, but maybe not. Maybe make this a little bit smaller, and kind of have that, more in the corner. Nudge it over to the right a little bit to kind of keep this spacing and this spacing the same. Um, Maybe make it a touch smaller. I like this tag. Um, oops. Uh, but what I was thinking, if it's relatively easy, what I was thinking is, if you took this guy and moved him up a little bit, if that was possible in Photoshop, if you know how to do that, to bring him up a little bit if you wanted two people. But I was thinking of having your text kind of go across the bottom, which you potentially could. Um, Even if you had a black bar, I don't know if that would take away too much from your overall design. Um, and maybe try to have this on one or two lines. So if you had like, we can't take the burn out of your climb, comma, next line, but we can take it out of your shaving. Um, the other idea I potentially had, and I'm not sure exactly how you would do it, but maybe separate it a little bit. So you had like feel the burn. Now that I'm saying it out loud, we can't take the burn out of your climb, and then here, but we could take it out of your shaving. To sort of like visually separate that a little bit, or maybe play around with different locations to sort of visually separate that. Um, but yeah, I think I might try. Yours is just kind of going to be visually arranging a little bit. I think that the concept works well, your text works well, your tagline works well. But I think kind of separating this block visually a little bit, if it's on two lines, if it's going to stay together, or see if you can sort of separate the two and have it, look interesting and visually. Again, if you kind of put, again, I don't know if you'd want a black bar, going across the bottom, it might disrupt the visual, because I like the idea of having that cut completely across, as I keep scrolling. But again, maybe move this guy up, and then that sort of frees up a little bit of space. But yeah, I think overall it's a great start. Um, Interesting visuals. Again, I think yours is going to be sort of lightly kind of editing this stuff. But yeah, I think it works really well. All right, then we'll go to Laura's as I keep scrolling. All right. I think um, I think overall I like the visuals you have. I like this, diagonal visual you have with the green and the texture. And then it was smart to not have texture behind this. And then the little pops of the trees with the snow on it, and then kind of in our dude in the middle of nowhere, it looks like in a hot tub or something. It's a good visual. I like it. Um, I think the headline works well. I think we could even move it up a little bit. Maybe go with a bolder font. Um, Even if it's the same font, if it's a little bit bolder, you might need to spread out the tracking of your text a little bit. But I think moving it up so it's away from this a little bit, because you have, all this space. Not that you need it right at the top there, but definitely nudge it up a bit. Um, and then I think with this block of text, I think you can free up a little space and make your origins logo a little bit smaller. Maybe tuck it in, almost right up against that safe space. But if you made it a little bit smaller and tucked it more in the corner, that would open up a little bit of space here. I think maybe I like the message of it, but maybe editing, simplifying that a little bit so it's not a big block of text. You know what I mean? Um, Yeah, I'm trying to think of how to simplify that. I mean, you might even be able to get the origins out of there because we're already talking about origins. The logo's already there, so you could have, all natural plant-based moisturizers, um, and shave bombs, blah blah blah. Even if you could simplify that with like, origins, all natural plant-based skincare products, um, let you feel, um, so that way, you can kind of simplify that a little bit, but maybe just a little bit of like editing that to make that, a bit smaller, if that makes sense, that paragraph, that block. Um, yeah. And then I think I like the product shots that you have. I think maybe either losing the soap there, um, or potentially replacing it with a different product. It does kind of get lost. The white on white gets lost a little bit. Like again, the green cap and the white here fits well. But I think that this, soap gets a little bit lost, or make the soap a little bit bigger, um, so it sticks out a little bit more, so it doesn't get so lost visually. Maybe even making this branch a little bit smaller. If these two are the same size, you could probably knock them down both a little bit. Um, but I think either try losing this, or again making it slightly bigger, just so that it like separates a little bit more. But I think other than that, um, yeah, I think this is a really strong idea, strong visuals. Um, Again, some editing to finish it up. Right, then we need to go to Derek's here. So I think we have a very strong visual. I like the sort of, not that it's like super goofy, but I like the sort of comedic element to it. Um, it's tough to tell without your guides, but I think everything is definitely within those safe spaces, so nothing's going to get cut off, et cetera, et cetera. I think I always struggle with this part. Smell as good as the great outdoors. Um, I think that works. I'm trying to think of how you might edit that to sort of simplify it a bit, but I don't know if there really is a way to do that. Um, but potentially maybe work on, or if you already have, some other iterations of that, like that idea overall. Um, but I think it works. I think it works pretty well. I think that the text works, like the font you chose works pretty well. Um, I think I might, depending on where your guides are, I might move the Origins logo to the right and down a little bit. And then for your products, I think you have a good selection. But I think, if you're going to overlap them, uh, have, these two overlap, so you close up this gap in the middle. Maybe move the soap to the left a little bit, and then move the firefighter to the right just a little bit. Um, and then maybe even nudge it down slightly. You sort of already started to do that. So I think if you're going to arrange things like that, to where they're like offset from each other, you want to, not that you want to go over the top, but you want to kind of, um, make it look intentional, right? So maybe drop this down, not a ton, but like 4 or 5 clicks down. and then have these overlap a little bit slightly just to sort of cover that gap. Again, um, and then reducing the overlap here. Um, maybe have the soap end here, give or take, and then the same kind of for the firefighter. So it's almost like you see more 2/3 of the bottle rather than covering up the product so much. And then again, kind of lowering it so you have the soap and the bottom kind of tucked right in that bottom corner. I think work well. I think it's just kind of arranging some of your elements at the bottom here. And if you can, I think the headline works really well. I like it. Um, uh, I was trying to think of simplifying a little bit, but I think you have a good job there, or a good idea there. Um, but if you had a couple of different ideas for that, I don't know if there is a better way to write that out. Not that it's clunky, but you know, sort of smooth it out a little bit if that makes sense. But yeah, I think overall, awesome start. Right, then back to. Oh, did I skip Sanaa? I believe I did. So we'll go to Sanaa. So I like the idea that you have here. However, the orientation is flipped. We need to go portrait rather than landscape with this. Um, I think you have a decent start. I like how clean it is. I like the setup that you have. The additional images there to go along with the shave stuff. But what I would do if you're going to use your image is a little bit generic. Um, that's not an insult. It's sort of nondescript, if that makes sense. So there's no kind of um, indication of um, again, if you didn't have the words, but if you didn't have the shave things, there's no indication of like this is for a male product, etc. Um, and then you have sort of this kind of cleanish. It's a great image, but it is kind of vague. So I think that if you're going to use an image like that, you need to have a really strong headline, um, and also sort of describing the products a little bit, because we have consciously formulated green chemistry. Um, again, I think it's a little bit vague, but I would start with having your orientation be correct. So we're going to go vertically instead of horizontally, and then that's just I'm just going to do this. So even if you had, I'll move this over this way. So depending on this image, I'm trying to see if you had that cropped. Yeah, you may need to find a different image. Um, oops, that's not what I want to do. I want to rotate. So you might need to find a different image. Obviously, this is going to get sort of blown out. It's going to get kind of blown out if you make that bigger. But again, you could kind of do the similar setup. I like the idea of having, open space. If you had, obviously, that kind of, depending on how pixelated that gets, um, and depending on where you wanted to place that with the sort of sink in the window in the background. But I do kind of like the idea of having, this sort of clean look, and if you wanted to have a few of the products, a somewhat similar thing. Um, but I think what you're going to need to work on is, sort of that a little bit more obviously male oriented. Even if you had, you know, um, this in the upper left, give or take, and then you sort of have some space for, um, whether you use this or these tags or not, you kind of have a little bit of free space to kind of play around with the visual a little bit. You know, not that you want to go like this obvious, but depending on where you wanted to set these, you know, you kind of have this nice space to work with to kind of give this a little bit of movement. I'm just kind of like spitballing here, but you kind of get the idea of where you want, kind of where you want things. Um, you know, again, not that you want it like on the nose like that, but even if you had, you know, kind of use the visual and the text together sort of as a design element. And again, you know, potentially coming up with something that leans more male, because that's the audience that we're trying to reach. But I think, you know, switching your orientation and I think rearranging and then potentially coming up with a different headline, maybe a different image, depending on how pixelated this image gets. It's tough to tell when I don't have the image, but I think overall, a pretty decent start. All right, and then we did Derek's, I believe. Yes. All right, the next, Brandon. There we go. So for yours, oops, I like zoom out by accident. For yours, and then this kind of, there's a few people that have this going on in a couple of different things. We want to watch out for these empty text boxes. Um, Not sure why those are there. They're relatively easy to plunk down by accident if you kind of drag by, you know, by accident and drop a text box. But we want to make sure that we're not, you know, leaving those visuals will indicate that there's empty text boxes, and that could lead to problems with print output. Again, I replaced the font with the Broadway. I'm not sure that my Broadway is the same as yours. So we can look at that in class. So this might not have represented as you have it on your screen. I like the image that you have. I think that visually it works. I think this is a little bit large, as far as, again, like these things are going to print, you know, in theory, these things are going to print pretty huge. Um, but instead of going like dead center, you know, we kind of think about it like our rule of thirds for those of you guys that have taken, not Photoshop, but yeah, Photoshop, photography. You know, instead of having this dead center, having it off a little bit, even with the path, you have this kind of visual curling around. Um, you know, having it off to the left a little bit, like work with the visual, right? You have this product, you have this nice visual, you know, have your images work together to create, you know, that sort of interesting visual. I think I might, it's tough to have, that's not too bad. Sometimes the green on green is tricky to work with. You can also change the color of this. That's why I provided the Illustrator file. So if you wanted either white, or you can kind of even match if you go to this eyedropper. Sometimes it works well, sometimes it doesn't. But if you want to sort of match a green or a different color from your image, you can kind of get there. I might put this in the upper left. Yeah, the right might be too tight. I might put this in the upper left, give or take. And then that gives you sort of more room to play around with a headline or your tagline, whatever you want to call it. I like, again, I like the idea. I think the product and the image work well together. I think what we're kind of missing is that sort of male audience that we're trying to reach. And I think I'm trying to think of how you can add that, but even like pure protection, I don't mind the theme that you're going with, but should just potentially try to add, like, your most of your work is going to be working on this headline, to try to go with a target audience a little bit more. But I think your visual works well. I think, you know, some minor tweaks with your visual, you know, think of some of those like design elements that are around the classroom. But again, instead of having this dead center, you know, even if I made it a bit smaller, but even you can kind of see the difference of having it just about dead center to having it off a little bit, you know, gives the image and the layout a little bit more more dynamics, more movement, etc. And again, just kind of working on the on your tagline just to sort of more reflect that target audience. But I think overall you have a very, very strong start. All right. And then we talk about Nathaniels? We'll go to Nathaniels here. Feel like I'm bouncing around from try to do this alphabetically and I failed. All right. So again, I think um, visually it's pretty strong. Um, I think again we're kind of missing that target audience, right? So this is sort of more of a general audience. Um, I think we could kind of maybe edit your product selection a little bit. I like that you kind of went with a targeted thing. You know, you created this bundle. I like that. Um, but I might edit it a little bit, or maybe choose a couple of different products. You have them overlapped really well to where you're not covering them up too much. Um, but yeah, I think if you were to go offset with, which works, I think if you were to go offset with um, I'm thinking and doing at the same time and it never works. With your products, um, I might make them a tiny bit smaller. Um, and then kind of have them off, give or take. I mean, this is also kind of quick and dirty. Um, and you could even have your try our new bundle today. It disappears a little bit, or even down at the bottom. You'll have to play around and see how that works. Um, but just to sort of offset it, keep the offset that you had. I like the offset that you did have. Um, but I think the way that you had it, it was just kind of, it's a fine line between that sort of like arbitrary, you know, placement. You want to make sure that you are placing your objects, um, you know, uh, so they don't look arbitrary, so they look like a conscious choice again, right? So if you had this offset, like not that you have to line things up, but sometimes I like to sort of all basically, not perfectly, but I'll basically align that to where like sort of visually, the baseline ish here lines up with the top of the logo there. Um, and then again, that might be a little too much, but you get the idea. Um, arranging some of your taglines. I think um, your headline and tagline might change. The try our new bundle, I don't mind. The headline I don't mind, but again, maybe something that speaks a little bit more to the target demo that we're going with. And then sort of lastly, um, I might go if there is a bold version of this, which there's not. Um, I might try to go with a bolder font because again, as you see, like as we zoom out, it kind of disappears there a little bit. So you want to make sure that your font is readable. You don't want to go with like a heavy chunky font, but you want something that's definitely more readable than that. But I think for you, I like your visual, I like the background, I like the products that you have going, the arrangement, etc. I think yours overall is going to be sort of arranging your elements and then coming up with a headline and or tagline that sort of more directly reflects our target audience there. And then I think lastly we have Corbin, and there was a couple, they look pretty similar. I think you were just kind of playing around with color. I kind of lean towards the green, but that's going to be a decision of yours. Um, yeah, I think I like this overall. I think that you have, um, it leans more male than female, I think, just given the sort of the font, the texture that you have, but then also the, you know, defense against stench, that kind of stuff that's usually not stuff like that usually isn't really used in female leaning um, target audiences. I think that works well. The only thing, not the only thing, but one of the things that we're missing is I would like the origin. I mean, even though it's in the product, you want to make sure that you have that Origins logo in the ad somewhere. I think your product choices work well. I think maybe if we had and again, you guys wouldn't know this, but these bottles are way bigger than these bottles. Um, so maybe even if you reversed it, if you had, the shampoo conditioner here, and then the smaller bottles, um, give or take, um, and then potentially if you got rid of the soap and then had the Origins logo in here to sort of keep the visual that you have, and then I might make all of this overall a little bit smaller, right? It's a sort of a big block of um, product, and you have this, larger block of text. Um, I might see if you can make that a little bit larger, or even maybe a slightly bolder font, just so it doesn't disappear as you zoom out. Um, I know you want obviously, I think what you're doing there is you want the sort of emphasis to be here and to be eye-catching. I get that. Even if you wanted to have this be white or gray and then have this larger line be green, I think would work. But I think that, that top line disappears a little bit. You're sort of burying not quite punchline, but you're burying the punchline a little bit. But I think that this grouping, again, I like the way it's laid out. I like the way it looks. Even if you made these bottles a little bit bigger, just so that they're not lined up, like you have these nice step downs. Maybe have this, you know, go up to here, or even have these two a little bit smaller, so they kind of step down a little bit as well, maybe end, give or take, there and there. Um, Make them overall smaller, and then include the Origins logo in there. If you got rid of the soap there, that might give you some room to have the Origins logo and also like a step down. So basically, your Origins logo is like effectively like within here, kind of replacing that soap. We definitely want to have the logo in there, but yeah, I think overall the imagery works well. I think the layout works well. I think just some sort of minor tweaks to bring this one home. Excellent work, everybody.